Hey everybody, this is Jason Stallings from the Artifice Podcast and Jason Stallings Art, and I'm talking to you directly live from Dallas in 2026, January, and it is the precursor to a snowmageddon, so to speak. But at the time being, this precipitation hasn't been that severe. I was able to walk around. Famously, I live in Dallas, Texas, and we are not at all remotely ever prepared for a snowstorm. Hopefully this won't be as bad as 2021, which I, lived through myself. But anyway, not what I'm talking to you today. It's just kind of a little context about why I'm looking like I'm in my pajamas, because I am. So I wanted to talk to you today about this painting, and to a lesser extent maybe this one. The one on the top is called Suliu, which I had previously named it something else, but during my last show I actually stacked these two paintings over each other like this. The one on the bottom, Vanitas redacted in parentheses, is the main subject today, and both paintings, I kind of want to get to the core of the subject matter, is that I allowed time for these paintings, especially this latter one, to kind of evolve naturally. And when you go through art school training, you are kind of trained to produce things at a rapid pace in a production, kind of, not an assembly, but like, how do I say this? Kind of like efficiently. And that informed the way I think about mixed media painting, and it sort of flies in the face of this sort of conventional question that you always get as an artist, like, well, how long did that take you? I'm like, well, that's not relevant. Relevant is really what's the substance of the piece and the story behind it, and how the medium's used and all that. So I understand why people ask that. It's just sort of the first thing that comes to mind. The work I make is fairly complicated, but the time it takes is a little relative. Some pieces I've done take me, a few weeks, couple days, months. It varies. But in this case, I began the process of Suliu is kind of around the George Floyd protest, actually. I'll get to why that's relevant, but I was kind of processing. Yeah, I think it was originally called Fin du Monde. That's right, which means end of the world in French. Though I changed it to Suliu, because Suliu is a French term that means under the eye. And if you know anything about Margaret Atwood's story, The Handmaid's Tale, under his eye is a very relevant kind of like Orwellian dystopian phrase that gets attributed to a lot of elements of the story. But yeah, this in a sense, this is my attempt to find some level of like beautification or aesthetic, like lushness in something that is kind of reacting to something that's kind of dark going on around you. But in a few years before that, I did two pieces that were kind of this like double eye motif thing. I've only done that a little bit. It's a lot of fun. It's sort of, I only did it a little bit just for personal reasons, but I'll kind of get into that motivation. And yeah, I had so you had this one in 2009, this one in 2010 of spring, so they were a few months apart from each other. But Suliu and Vanitas were kind of more up in where I am as far as my current evolution as an artist. The idea behind Vanitas began kind of vague. It was me just thinking, well, what if I combined a portrait, a sort of still life and a cityscape into an abstract painting. What would that look like? What would I do with it? That was kind of the loose idea, and the began with these wine glasses. Now, wine glasses are, and also the goldfish. Where is that? Yeah, there we go. There's one goldfish in one of the glasses and one outside. Both of those are sort of loose references to lyrics from Pink Floyd's album "Wish You Were Here," and "Shine on You Crazy Diamond," where you had the beginning of the album opens with this like almost orchestration of these wine glasses being, round like this. Now, the origin of that was from a project that Pink Floyd did called Household Objects, which is sort of a famously failed concept album that rendered a little bit of music, but not too much, like maybe 2 songs that have ever been released. But the wine glasses motif found its way into a song. But the goldfish began to, two lost souls in a fishbowl. I took that fairly literally, as thinking, well, this sort of reflects a certain level of, at the time, mild social isolation I was feeling. Of course, this is one of those things, your connection with people kind of does this, and it vacillates, it comes and goes. It's one of those things that you internalize, but over time I realized people have their lives. There's nothing personal to take here. And, long term, these things just work themselves out. And those connections came back around and were found again. So that was just me internalizing what was going on in my life. So, but as the painting went on, in some of the creative choices I made, began to sort of take on a life of their own, and I started to see connected tissue and an idea forming. Now, on this end, you have these abstracted portraits of Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring, and down here you have an apple. Now, there's a lot of imagery and iconography and things you can associate that with. Now, for me specifically, you have this obscured and sometimes less, sometimes more image of a woman and their identity and their rights slowly being eroded. And that led to the glasses sort of symbolizing power and wealth as a sort of exploitative and oppressive force. Over here you have the Reunion Tower, you have Lincoln and Washington Memorial, you have other, I think might be the Chrysler Building, and above that you have the roots of the painting. So to me, this began to symbolize the erosion of society, and in a lot of ways, the idea of something being redacted and removed and erased. Erasure is a common concept that is brought up in different artistic thought and intellectual discussions, whether it's cultural erasure of autonomy, things like that. And people you might ask, well, why would you get into doing these things? In my background as an artist, I studied editorial illustration and art as a discipline. So, while I sort of scaled back the directness of this painting and kind of leave it open-ended, because that's, in some respects, you could consider it proper in fine art to do that. There is a very deliberate and direct sort of moved in prerogative in editorial side to be very direct and inform an opinion, or at least interpret one. Sometimes it's just reading an article in the news or even a book and saying, okay, this is an image that is a companion to that and reflects it, and it sort of informs a level of emotional depth and sort of reinforces an idea behind the words. So, but I've always found that to be a compelling process. I don't think I will always do that with paintings, but in this case, it was sort of something that gradually came about. I mean, the apple is, there's a lot of things you can infer from that, like knowledge, sort of like historical like representations of religious symbolism that like the Adam and Eve and the apple and all that. And in this case, it's sort of like giving a somewhat foreboding message to it. So like there's this sort of the progression of erosion and something that moves something more deliberate to something more abstract and sort of like, I don't know if corrupt is the word, but it's sort of like erodes, and there's a progression and a regression implied by it. But I also was thinking about things in terms of like open space and changing the way I approach the visual space in my work gradually, which I have been over the last few years. And it just depends on the painting. But Suliu, which is sort of another reaction to sort of civic unrest, is sort of like processing what's going on in front of you, but also taking stock of your like basic needs and saying like, hey, like these things don't have to necessarily conflict, and they shouldn't, just for either your comfort or your discomfort. So and I had a conversation recently with an art advisor about like the idea of like creating a cohesive narrative in my work, and I will be doing that. I've worked on a series of drawings and illustrations that will make their way into feature abstract pieces. And not to say that there won't be some level of editorial like undertones to it, especially because there's a lot of exploration of world cultures and history, but the approach might be different. But I just wanted to kind of create a little bit of a video about this, more to just show to anybody who's interested in art or making art or thinking about it, is sometimes a direct and deliberate and immediate idea and action is valid, and sometimes giving something time to naturally evolve can really bear fruit. So yeah, I am really pleased with this piece and the two pieces. I have been thinking about other ways to take my art into parallel directions, but not exactly that direction. But and I mean, being real, like especially living in Texas, which is a very conservative place, there is a lot of pressure to create something that, for lack of a better word, flatters an audience rather than challenges it. I've always had some discomfort with this. Not to say I don't always want to create something that brings beauty and maybe provides some level of escape, but I don't believe that is the only reason I was, trained to be an artist, and why I think that I see myself as somebody who sees value in variety, and I also see value in creating something that provides not provocative controversy per se, but like thoughtful reflection in the viewer. And sometimes that thoughtful reflection will create discomfort. That's just part of the process. And like it's also me reacting to the very like scummy and grifty and sort of like opportunistic narrative that is being built around AI and AI art, that I have a pretty strong opposition to for personal and professional reasons. Like because I'm a physical artist and I work with physical media, I don't necessarily feel directly threatened by it, but I do see an intellectual threat and frankly, a very environmental threat. I mean, like, nothing about this is necessarily positive. I mean, it takes industrial pollution and waste and skyrockets the impact that anything you could have ever had before. It really is pretty alarming. So beyond that, I think it's really worth discussing a piece like this. I will continue to create and discuss other kinds of work as I progress, and really because I have a very clear vision now of the pieces I'm going to make moving forward. You know, there may be some similarities and some differences in subject matter, but stylistically, you know, things will be fairly consistent. Anyway, yeah, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to view this, and hopefully, you know, it isn't too cold this weekend in Texas. Looking forward to discussing other work with you soon. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe, etc.